December 18, 1944. In the Philippine Sea, waves towered up to 60 feet while winds screamed past 100 knots. Admiral William F. Halsey's Third Fleet faced not an enemy fleet, but the full fury of the Pacific itself. On board the USS New Jersey, crewmen struggled to see past the bow. Destroyers disappeared in the swirling mist, and aircraft tore free from their lashings on carrier decks, exploding in hangars. Within hours, 3 destroyers would vanish, taking nearly 800 sailors with them. This is the story of how the most powerful U.S. naval force of World War II sailed directly into a typhoon it never saw coming, and how the storm reshaped the Navy forever. In mid-December 1944, Halsey's Third Fleet operated in the Western Pacific during the Philippines campaign. Task Force 38, under his command, was a formidable armada, carriers, battleships, cruisers, and destroyers supporting General Douglas MacArthur's advance. After weeks of combat, many ships were running low on fuel and supplies. Halsey ordered the fleet east to meet supply ships and replenish at sea, aiming to stay near the action but out of range of Japanese air attacks. Wartime meteorology was limited. Forecasts relied on sparse reports from ships, islands, and occasional aircraft. Satellites and computer models did not exist. Each carrier had an aerologist, and general weather updates came twice daily from Hawaii. Before December 17th, nothing alarming appeared in reports. Halsey's staff assumed any storm activity was far to the east. In reality, a compact tropical storm was brewing dangerously close. On December 17th, TF-38 attempted refueling in worsening seas. Sailors struggled with towering swells. Hoses snapped, and destroyers like USS Maddox nearly collided with oilers. By noon, Halsey aborted the attempt, setting a new rendezvous for the following morning, hoping for calmer waters. Unknown to him, this location lay directly in the path of the intensifying storm. The weather reports he relied on were dangerously inaccurate. Typhoon Cobra, as it would later be named, was already only 120 miles to the east. Captain Jasperoff, commanding the replenishment group TG-30.8, warned that severe weather was approaching the new refueling point. Meanwhile, Fleet Weather Central in Hawaii plotted the storm moving north, missing its true westward path, which would bring it directly over Halsey's fleet. Trusting the faulty data, but determined to support MacArthur, Halsey unknowingly steered the fleet on a collision course with disaster. Over the late hours of December 17th, the seas continued to build. Halsey adjusted plans as reports trickled in. Late that afternoon, upon learning of worsening weather near the second rendezvous, he ordered a third location, steering the fleet west, briefly outrunning the storm. Yet the reprieve was temporary. By nightfall, communications faltered and confusion spread as heavy seas forced ships to scatter. With towering waves battering vessels, Halsey canceled the third rendezvous and chose a fourth. Further northwest, attempting to use wind direction to their advantage, he shifted course south, planning to swing northwest toward the new refueling point by morning. These maneuvers inadvertently kept the fleet crisscrossing in front of the approaching typhoon. Sailors sensed this was no ordinary storm. Ships ran blind through mounting waves and gale-force winds. By pre-dawn on December 18th, conditions worsened. Barometers fell steadily, winds climbed past 40 knots, and driving rain squalls obliterated visibility. Crewmen on carrier decks crawled on hands and knees to avoid being swept overboard. Without knowing the storm's center, the fleet pressed on. By late morning, Typhoon Cobra struck with full force. Winds of 73 knots and gusts over 100 knots, combined with waves reaching 60 to 70 feet, merged sea and sky into a chaotic wall of water. Halsey's flagship, USS New Jersey, struggled amid 30 to 40-foot waves. By 11 o'clock, many ships had lost formation entirely. Captain Jasper Acuff of the replenishment group reported that some vessels could no longer distinguish sea from sky, a terrifying whiteout of water and driving rain. Sailors were ordered off exposed decks as waves crashed over warship bows and flight decks. Finally, at 13:45, Halsey broadcast a fleet-wide typhoon warning, acknowledging the crisis. By then, however, the storm had already inflicted deadly damage. Destroyers, smaller and partially low on fuel, were especially vulnerable. Standard procedure called for ballasting down to improve stability, but many captains had delayed, hoping to refuel. It was too late. USS Spence, with only 15% fuel, began pumping seawater into its tanks to stabilize. The massive waves overwhelmed her. Around 11:10 a.m., a violent gust flooded ventilation uptakes, knocking out power. Beam on to towering waves, the destroyer rolled over and capsized. Out of more than 300 crew, only 23 survived. USS Hull, a top heavy Farragut-class destroyer, struggled even with 70% fuel. Gusts exceeding 100 knots rolled her repeatedly. A massive gust of 110 knots struck around midday, flooding the bridge and smokestacks. Hull capsized, leaving just 60 to survivors of over 100. USS Monahan, with 76% fuel, faced similar challenges. Top-heavy and delayed in ballasting, she rolled violently, lost power, and sank, leaving debris and men in the stormy sea. Out of roughly 256 aboard, only 6 survived. Even larger warships suffered. Carriers were slammed by the wind. Planes broke free on pitching decks, smashing into hangars. On the light carrier USS Monterey, a chain reaction ignited gasoline fires. Lieutenant Gerald R. Ford, the future U.S. president, serving as officer of the deck, helped contain the blaze. Monterey lost 18 aircraft overboard or to fire, with 16 damaged and nearly 40 crew injured. Elsewhere, USS Cowpens, Langley, and San Jacinto also faced loose aircraft and severe rolls. Across the fleet, 146 aircraft were destroyed or lost by the typhoon's end. By afternoon, the storm had scattered Halsey's fleet over a 50 to 60-mile area. Ships still afloat struggled to regroup, and the scale of the disaster became apparent as survivors and wreckage were found in the water. When Typhoon Cobra finally passed, Admiral Halsey ordered all available ships to search for survivors from the lost destroyers. Rescue operations were desperate, conducted in still rough seas. Many sailors had drifted for hours, clinging to wreckage, life rafts, or life vests. One of the fleet's unlikely heroes was the destroyer escort USS Tabor, commanded by Lieutenant Commander Henry Lee Page. Though her own ship had been badly damaged, losing form and radio antennas, Tabor began a systematic search, defying general orders to proceed to port. On the night of December 18th, still during the storm, Tabor found a single sailor from USS Hull clinging to debris. Over the next 51 hours, her crew combed the storm-swept waters, rescuing 55 survivors from Hull, Spence, and Monahan who might otherwise have been lost. Other vessels picked up additional survivors once the weather cleared. In total, 93 sailors were rescued of the more than 800 who had gone overboard from the 3 sunken destroyers. For these extraordinary efforts, LCDR Page received the Legion of Merit, and Tabor's crew was awarded the Navy Unit Commendation, the first ever issued, honoring their bravery and initiative. By December 19th, Halsey brought the battered Third Fleet into anchorage at Ulithi Atoll as soon as it was safe. Around 2 a.m., he learned definitively that 3 destroyers had been lost with nearly all hands. The storm had delivered one of the U.S. Navy's worst natural disasters. Admiral Chester Nimitz described the typhoon's impact as more crippling than many expected. From enemy action, the toll was staggering: 790 sailors dead or missing, 3 destroyers sunk, and 27 other ships, including battleships, cruisers, and carriers, damaged. 11 ships were so badly harmed they required major repairs in port. Dozens of naval aircraft were destroyed or lost. It was, by any measure, the Navy's worst weather-related loss in history. The calamity prompted a formal inquiry. In January 1945, aboard the repair ship USS Cascade, a panel of admirals including Admiral Nimitz questioned Halsey and his staff. The findings, delivered in February, acknowledged Halsey's error of judgment in sailing the fleet into the typhoon, but stopped short of harsh discipline. His decisions were deemed errors made under wartime pressure, stemming from a desire to meet operational demands. Halsey was quietly removed from operational command for a time, passing leadership to Admiral Raymond Spruance, though he later resumed command during the war's final stages. The inquiry also noted the delays of Spence, Hull, and Monahan in ballasting down and preparing for the storm, which contributed to their losses. The report stressed lessons learned rather than assigning blame. Aiming to prevent future tragedies, Typhoon Cobra's legacy reshaped the U.S. Navy. The disaster led to improved training, revised ship stability rules, and redesigns of destroyers to reduce top heaviness. Fleet operations were adjusted to allow dispersal in extreme weather, avoiding the risks of maintaining tight formations in storms. Most critically, the typhoon exposed weaknesses in meteorological intelligence. That a typhoon could surprise the Third Fleet was unacceptable. The Navy overhauled its weather tracking network in the Pacific, increasing reconnaissance flights and deploying weather ships to report conditions in real time. By mid-1945, a new Fleet Weather Central operated out of Guam, providing timely support to fleets at sea. These changes were tested just 6 months later. In June 1945, Typhoon Connie struck the U.S. fleet off Okinawa. Thanks to improved tracking, commanders took evasive action, reducing damage and demonstrating lessons learned from Cobra. While Cobra had been catastrophic, it did not alter the course of the Pacific War. The Navy repaired its ships and returned to action. But the storm served as a sobering reminder: the sea is as lethal as any enemy. For the men who survived, Typhoon Cobra was a harrowing ordeal. The Third Fleet's experience created a smarter, more weather-aware Navy. The tragedy taught that even without enemy action, vigilance and respect for nature's power are paramount. Typhoon Cobra was a lesson paid for in blood, but its lessons saved countless lives in the decades that followed. The storm remains the worst natural disaster in U.S. Navy history, proving that mastery of the ocean requires both strength and foresight. I truly hope you enjoyed this video. Please consider subscribing for more content, and I'll see you in the next one.